so much for joining us on Media Monitor as we deliberate on some topical stories this week. I am your host, Alicia Jali. Today we kick off the show by looking at International AIDS Conference highlights. Zizi Gordo of the ANC gives us clarity on Marius Fransman's position as ANC Western Cape chairperson. Now, could the rumored planned university's tuition hike see the return of the hashtag Fees Must Fall protest? We'll hear from the SASCO president, who will be here in studio with us. But should we celebrate the retention of interest rates or rather be concerned about the further downgrade of economic growth prospects? But first, it's 900 hours Central African time. Here are the current news leaders. Tensions are still high in Meerton in the Midvaal amid ongoing violent service delivery protests. Major roads are blocked in some of Johannesburg's central and northern suburbs as a result of a walking event this morning. Road closures affect the Judith Road and Greenside, the whole of Barry Hatzog Avenue, parts of Empire Road as well as parts of Braamfontein as far as the Nelson Mandela Bridge. Now, the road closures are expected to last until about 1 o'clock. Well, another group of Team SA will depart today to the Rio Olympic Games out in Brazil. The first team to leave the country was, of course, Bafana Bafana, followed by the under-23 men's football team, which departed last night. Now, giving us insight on the big stories of some of the political stories that we're going to discuss this week. We are expecting Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo, who's running a little bit late due to the traffic that we just spoke about, which is taking place around parts of Braamfontein. But we do have in studio with us Mr. Tshamano Makhadi, who's also a journalism lecturer at TUT. And of course, later on, we will welcome Business Day editor, Mr. Sichabagankosi, who's on the country's economic outlook. A very good morning to you, Tomani. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much indeed. Good morning to you too, Alicia.
All right. Well, let's start off our top story this week. The big story, of course, of the International AIDS Conference that's set in Durban this week under the theme Access, Equity, Rights. Now, last week we spoke to Dr. Salim Abdul Karim, one of the keynote speakers, who explained the importance of the 5-day conference that, among other things, deliberated on enforcing efforts in fighting the epidemic while also sharing government's advances in this regard. Let's take a quick look at some of the moving speeches that were delivered at the conference.
When my mother held the hand of a man dying of AIDS in an East London hospital, no one would have imagined that just over a quarter of a century later, treatment would exist that could see HIV-positive people live full, healthy, loving lives.
The fact of the matter is, young people are being left out and left behind in the AIDS response, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop. It needs to stop here and now.
AIDS does not discriminate on its own. It has no biological preference for black bodies, for women's bodies, for gay bodies, for youth or the poor. It doesn't single out the vulnerable, the oppressed, or the abused. We single out the vulnerable, the oppressed, and the abused.
Tshamano, what do you make? I mean, big names talking about this issue. And let's start by acknowledging the fact that this was actually held as one of the most inclusive AIDS conferences. I'm talking about the transgender as well as LGBT groups that were part of this conference, and of course voicing their concerns, saying that they need to be a huge part of such research projects.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, if you look at the number of people who attended as well, I mean, that on its own, it speaks, you know, a lot. I mean, it talks about the importance of fighting HIV and AIDS. It's not a South African thing. It's not just a matter of. It's a global thing, and it needs everyone to participate. It needs everyone to take charge, basically. Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you think we're getting to that free HIV world that health activists actually envisage? I mean, do you think that's ever going to be a dream that is going to be possible, an AIDS-free generation?
No, it will definitely take time, but it is everyone's responsibility. These are messages that needs to be preached almost daily in all our platforms. But if you look just here in South Africa, we have really alarming statistics, making it even worse. You're talking about young people who are if you're talking in terms of numbers, they're over 60% of our population, and between the ages of 15 to 24, as it's been reported, these are people that are living with HIV and AIDS. And most of them, you find them in universities as research states. Yeah.
Let's expand on that point, Tshamano. I mean, interestingly enough, the issue of blessers actually came out at this conference. I was actually shocked to find out that one of the US global research actually knew about the issue pertaining to blessers. So this is quite a worrying scourge, because apparently these young women are actually getting involved with older men for financial gain.
No, it's a worrying thing. I mean, look, amongst other issues that we worried about in the country is issues of unemployment. Now, when you have young people who are desperate and they're looking for money, they want to buy this and that. But I just think that it's something that we all have to do something about it. You're quite right, especially just watching that clip where you have these prominent figures really talking about this. And I think more can still be done in all sectors. If you're talking about university, if you're talking about just almost across the board. I mean, you're talking arts and culture, and I just think that everybody can contribute. What we have seen in recent days, I mean, the issue that you talk about with blessers, I mean, it's something that it has to be condemned by all means possible. Yeah.
Look, I mean, Tshamano, there's always the issue. Of course, we did get that 6 billion rand cash injection by the UN, but funding for research projects, it seems like there's just never enough money.
No, there's never enough money, considering the issue that you're dealing with here. Research on its own, it's good, but for me, it's about what you do. You know, again, I mean, we talk about messages that are being preached out there. Is it just a once-off thing? How many times do we see these messages? Do people even understand? You know, research on its own, it's a wonderful thing, but what is it that you do? And I'm talking in a practical sense. Yeah.
Look, let's talk about that. Speaking of messages, Prince Harry said that it is time for a new generation of leaders to step forward and continue with the fight. What do you make of that statement?
That statement, Alicia, it talks to young people in particular, and I'm glad that statement comes from a young person.
Man himself,
you know?
yes.
Yeah, it calls on young people to take a stand and say, we've got to stop this. If you're talking about somebody who is only 18, who probably have long life ahead of them, but if nobody really cares about taking these issues serious, spreading positive messages, we're never going to win the battle.
But I mean, let's talk about that then, Tshamano. What have we been doing incorrectly in terms of, let's look at South Africa in particular, that the youth are not getting this message of, you know what, it's either you abstain or you use protection. Where are we lacking when it comes to that information? We've seen various projects that the health department has embarked on. There's flavored condoms to try, and be trendy. I mean, the health minister has done so much to try and, bridge the gap when it comes to communication, particularly with young people.
No, I think it's really understanding the fact that we all have responsibility. It's not just an issue that has to start with government. They can do so much. You talk about those campaigns that we've seen. I mean, how many of them I've even lost count. But I think it has to go down to the ground. It has to be an issue where young people themselves and everyone else really take a stand and say, you know what, we've got to stop this, because it's about life, really. How many people are affected? You're talking about those statistics. How many children are living without their parents because of this pandemic? The numbers are alarming. So it's something that really we all have to take a stand. We all have to take responsibility. Yeah.
But what would you tell your students? I mean, I know that you're a lecturer. I mean, speaking to that level, bringing it down to that level to say, you know what, this fight is basically in your hands, because I think, you know, as peers, we tend to sit and have discussions amongst each other. I think the message would come across better that way. What do you think?
No, I think the most important issues for me is that, you know, when people are desperate, they can do anything. But we also have to encourage the culture of learning. We have to encourage the culture of, especially amongst a girl child, the culture of doing things for themselves. Otherwise, if you're waiting for a boyfriend or you're waiting for somebody to buy you that hairpiece, I don't know, Brazilian hair or whatever it is, and that's where most of the problems really come from, because when people are desperate, they end up just, doing the wrong things, which in the end, it sort of contributes to some of the problems that we have seen.
All right, well, you don't need that Brazilian hair. You can just keep your hair short. More burning issues shortly after this break. Do stay with us.
The SABC only opposed the policy that it would not cover visuals involving the destruction of public property or public institutions. Today in court, they withdrew their opposition to that policy, and they accepted that they would cover that. The only safeguard that they sought was that the order record that they still enjoy editorial discretion. Obviously, the HSF recognizes that editorial discretion exists, but it must lawfully be implemented.
The matter has been settled by all the parties that are involved, and from this stage we go back to our lawyers to then take this matter forward in terms of the order that has been put, because now it is an interim order, and then we'll interpret it further through our lawyers.
Welcome back. We now would like to welcome to the studio discussion Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo. Very good morning to you, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us. You were stuck in traffic out there.
Yes, I don't know what's happening today.
All right.
Just so busy.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you here. Now, in an unprecedented move this week, ANC Head of Elections, Nomvula Mokonyane, pronounced the return of suspended ANC Western Cape Chairperson Marius Fransman to his position. Announcement that was immediately refuted by ANC spokesperson Zizikodwa. Let's listen to these clips.
He's back in the ANC as the chair.
Why?
The issues have been resolved.
We must all work hard to make sure that the ANC is victorious everywhere in the Western Cape.
Prof, let's hear your view. What do you make of the latest developments surrounding Marius Fransman?
Well, I think the ANC is walking a very tightrope here, because you see that issue talks to ethical leadership issues which the ANC has to deal with. They have an integrity committee, but it's not very clear how much power this integrity committee actually has. And at the same time, the leadership itself within the ANC, I doubt if they read from the same script when it comes to the issues of ethical standing. Hence, you find these contradicting messages from the leadership of the very same organization. I doubt they read from the same script when it comes to the issues of ethical leadership, the implications of ethics within the organization. So I think that's basically the issue. But of course, there are also other undercurrents. And one of those undercurrents, I would say, relate to the fact that you remove Fransman in the Western Cape, and who do you put? A person who can appeal to both what they call colored population and African population. Who do you actually put? So there's going to be a challenge, definitely, to find an alternative to Fransman. At least the ANC has demonstrated to South Africa that they are concerned about leaders not abiding by ethical standards, hence the steps they took against Fransman. So I think that was a symbolic gesture. It was a symbolic message.
But then does his coming back not mean that the issue has been dealt with then? Taman?
Look, for me, this is a clear case of poor communication. You cannot have a situation where the head of election campaign makes a statement like we've seen in that clip, and she was very confident. And few days or probably just a few hours later, you get a contradicting, statement from the spokesperson of the party. So again, perhaps maybe it talks about the organizational structure. It's probably a situation where people are divided. There are those who feel that Fransman must come back, and there are those who feel he must never come back. So it's very bad, especially when it plays out in the public domain.
But was he not going through a disciplinary process there, Prof?
I thought he was going through that process, but when I hear the Minister of Water, of Sanitation, saying this thing has been dealt with, my view is that perhaps the disciplinary process has finished and arrived at a conclusion. Yes. This is still not clear. It's something, as a researcher, I think one would need to look at carefully and just unpack. Yes.
Look, I mean, there seems to be those who question the ANC's stance on women abuse based on some of its leaders that have come out to endorse him. Is this that it is maybe a case of not guilty until proven guilty? What do you think?
Look, for me, again, there's also the issue about consistency. If you look at how other matters of this nature have been handled previously, when you look at this situation, there's just a few gray areas in terms of consistency. I mean, you can just look for yourself.
But it's a legal matter, isn't it? I mean, there is a court case that is currently
absolutely
in line with this, and we've been hearing a lot. I mean, I think just in relation with the Oscar Pistorius case, there a lot of this word that the courts do not work on public or judge on public based on public opinion.
No, it's definitely a legal matter, one that has to be handled by the court. But obviously, in this particular regard, you have a situation where the organization also have to deal with their own internal matters.
Yes, it will be very disappointing, actually, if the ANC Integrity Committee and the national executive structures of the ANC don't really take a firm stand on this matter. As the public, as an ordinary citizen, we actually expected that the ANC will actually show leadership and deal with the Fransman matter as objectively and as firmly as possible, so that it sends out a message that as the organization, we really care and we have a strong position when it comes to issues like this.
You know, I think the last report that was made on this matter was the fact that there wasn't really much evidence pertaining to the case, and then maybe this is why we've received this outcome. Where do you think then is the lack of information? Where are we being misinformed as the public? Do we not have enough information as to what was the outcome of the disciplinary committee, or what was the outcome pertaining to the legal matters? What's going on?
For me, Alicia, the issue are mainly with how you communicate. And that is the story for me, because if you're dealing with a case of this nature, and I'm talking the organizational structure, how do you communicate to the public, members at large? So you have a situation where people seem to be a little bit disorganized, and again, it's no longer just about the person who is accused here, but how you deal with matters, because it reflects on you as an organization. It's not just a simple matter. This one, like you've rightfully pointed out, it's a legal matter, and even how you communicate around that particular subject, you've got to be very careful, and you've got to be seen to be taking matters very serious.
So what should we believe then, Prof?
It's difficult to say what we should believe, but I think the crux of the matter, let's stop beating around the bush. It's an organization, I'm talking about the ANC, an organization which has lost moral compass. It's an organization which is fraught with numerous ethical challenges, numerous contradictions. The leadership right at the top cannot put foot down on ethical issues and give direction. That's the bottom line.
So what needs to happen? Tshamano?
Somebody has to take a stand. It's a matter of, taking a stand and say, this is where it stops. And until such time you have people who are prepared to do that, what we're seeing playing out in the public space, it's not going to end. It's something that you're definitely going to see going forward.
But what do you make of the professor's analysis that, he had to be maybe reinstated because of the elections that are coming up very quickly?
Look, I mean, there's no doubt there are people who follow this man, and if he's not reinstated, the ANC is probably going to lose probably a few, voters in that province. But it's just complicated considering you have less than 2 weeks to go before the elections. Yeah, it's a complicated matter.
All right, it's very complicated indeed. And that's where we're going to leave it. We're going to take a quick ad break and come back with more Media Monitor. Do stay with us.
The interim interdict should not have been granted in the first place, and the Supreme Court of Appeal should have granted leave to appeal. Instead, it dismissed the application with costs. In the result, the following order is made. 1. Leave to appeal is granted. 2. The appeal is upheld. 3. The orders by Prinsloo J. and Jordan J. of the Gauteng Division of the Higher Court, Pretoria, are set aside and the application for an interim interdict is dismissed. 4. The order of the Supreme Court of Appeal awarding costs against the Tshwane Metropolitan Municipality is set aside. 5. Each party is to pay its own cost.
Did you go to heaven?
Kelvin is the one who created all this.
What are you fighting over? Us?
If there is 10 million in my account, it will be in the front page the next day.
Do you have 10 million?
Oh, Jesus, hold my hand. Hallelujah.
It's happening right here on Question Time today. Monday to Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
Africa is growing. As a result, it's also advancing the way it does things.
Any developments in technology can really do a lot to boost growth.
On Network, we'll show you how technology is improving the lives of Africans.
The life of an LED globe is 15 times longer than what they have currently.
We also have new gadgets, games, and the continent's innovative technology ideas. That's Network with me, Spomelele Zondi, every Sunday at 19:30 Central African Time.
News Today keeps you informed with news locally and around the world.
When Judge John Hlophe challenged the Supreme Court of Appeal when it sent the matter back and said that there must be an inquiry set up.
We unpack business news.
There's an increase in general inflation in the country.
We give you up-to-date news of the day.
The drugs were seized at several locations in Sydney, including a shipping container sent from Hong Kong. Police saying it's the largest haul of illicit drugs in 2 years.
We round up sports news.
Kotata, tell me about the legacy that you would like to build and be remembered for.
Trying to get my foundation running, which is going to focus on, all the sport, doesn't matter disability or able body. So, I'm passionate about sports.
Stay informed every Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m. CAT. SABC News.
Welcome back. Now, if media reports are to be believed, we could see the return of the hashtag Fees Must Fall movement. The Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Blaine Nzimande, is expected to announce universities' tuition increase for next year, an announcement that is said to be opposed by students' bodies. Now, senior producer spoke to the department spokesperson about this issue, and she was told that the minister is still being advised on the matter and therefore cannot comment further on that issue. Let's now welcome SASCO President Mr. Thabo Moloja. Thabo, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning to you, Alicia, and your viewers at home.
Thabo, what do you make of this latest announcement?
I don't think it's an announcement per se. I think it's speculation by media, stemming from the Mail and Guardian report, which I'm quite happy that in the same report, the Council of Higher Education, which is said to have been made this pronouncement, it stands itself and says the media is uninformed. Any discussion on fees now will be to undermine the engagements that are ongoing. The Presidential Commission, the Ministerial Committee that is established to look into the missing middle question. So anyone who's attempting to discuss fees, we have said this, even Tsagani captures it correctly, that all SRCs in the country, they are meeting now in a university in Cape Town. We have said to them, we're not going to engage in any fees. There are no fees that we're going to discuss. We're waiting for the president to pronounce for education in our...
But Thabo, has anybody approached you about any possibility that the fees could be going up? I mean, has the Higher Education Department been in talks with you guys about this?
We have met with the minister and we're meeting him again, I think, in a week's time. We are approached by media saying there is a fee increment coming. And we're saying, where do we get this report from? The minister has not said these things. Our universities, actually, if you look into them, a lot of them, they are quite clear that they are waiting from a guidance from the department and from the Presidential Commission. But when we met with the Commission itself and said, our position is clear that there won't be any fees until pronounced on the stance for free education.
Gentlemen, what do you make of this? Prof, let's start with you.
Well, I think he's articulated it correctly, and I agree with him.
The media is misinformed.
I fully agree with him. He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. Let us wait for a formal pronouncement based on the President's Commission.
But where did then the media get all these...
I still don't know where this comes from.
Tshamano?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really surprising considering what this has done to our country.
Absolutely.
And I say that because, obviously, it was a positive campaign when it started, but there were other elements that kicked in, immediately after that. We've seen vandalism in universities, public structures, being vandalized. So when this comes from the media. And again, I mean, he's sitting here saying, well, we haven't heard anything, we don't have an official word. I'm finding it really, really alarming because it has potential to create, that whole vibe of people wanting to just go just a little bit crazy in the context of what we have seen last year.
Thabo, maybe then just to give us an update, I mean, how far are you in terms of the fee discussions? Where are you in terms of what's going to happen going forward? Are we going to see an increment anytime in the near future? Where's the discussion at this stage?
We're not discussing fees. I think if there is, our stand is we're not discussing fees. As far as the achievements of Fees Must Fall campaign, we're actually discussing transformation issues more than fees. We are at least bothered about fees because we don't want fees. That is our stand. We don't want fees. We have said decommodify higher education, remove the price tag to education. It must not have a price tag. And therefore, we can't be discussing fees when we don't want fees. We're discussing our issues about the reactionary forces like AfriForum that continues to hamstrung universities. University of Free State, for example, goes out and says the language of tuition in that university must be in English. But they go to court and challenge that, and they've won that, unfortunately. And we're looking into possible ways to take this thing to the highest court on the land because we don't believe universities must take a stand to transform. And people who are opposed to transformation, they use the very same courts to stifle transformation in our universities. Our worry is really not fees now. We're not discussing fees. We're discussing insourcing. We're saying how many have you insourced? How far are you in terms of transforming this university, in terms of the language policy, in terms of the renaming of the buildings, institutional culture, institutional philosophies. We are not preoccupied about fees. We think Treasury, the Department of Higher Education and Training, and the President on this case, they must deliberate and inform us. And how are we going to face in free education? We are at least concerned about discussing. We were saying we're not going to discuss fees.
Are your members aware of these issues, Thabo? They do know that you're not discussing fees.
We convened a national policy conference during the June recess.
Yes.
It was attended by 900 members of SASCO from all branches of SASCO in the country, as well as SRCs, where we have members in, which are predominantly all colleges and universities. And we've said, you know what, we have made serious strides in terms of our struggle for free quality education in this country. We've seen that we've neglected some parts of that sector, which is the TVET sector. We've also even picked up the cost of no fee increment of last year. If you think about it, remember the universities were given 6%, but unfortunately, residences that are privately leased by our universities, they increased their fees beyond the 6%. So a lot of students were disadvantaged by that. So we're saying now universities must engage with some of these privately leased residences, not to increase their own fees or else stop doing business with them. We're clear about that. We're saying there are a lot of students who stay in Soweto who don't necessarily need accommodation, but universities are unlike colleges. They don't give them transport allowance. So how can we explore creative ways in which we can deal with the accommodation crisis in the sector? The Minister had convened now during this month student housing symposium. And we're discussing some of those things. We say, how do we increase the allocations of rooms, the beds in the sector? How do we even support the college sector? Because college sector is quite has challenged modern universities. If you look into the college space, there's a lot of issues. As a matter of fact, the no fee increase last year only affected universities. The colleges, they increased their fees with 16%. And that is directly the Department of Higher Education and Training that is responsible for those colleges. So we're quite focused about our struggle beyond just universities. And we, like I said, that our battle now is how do we ensure that we remove enemies of transformation like AfriForum and the allies in the Democratic Alliance and ensure really that we transform this sector. We'll stop at nothing. If it means we must go and march at the AfriForum head offices, we'll do so. If it means that we must go and march at the courts for them to be transformed and arrive at a proper decision. You will see, for example, with the case of Pretoria's name street renaming, two courts ruled against the city, but the Concord ruled in favor of the city that we can't keep the apartheid names in the city, in the capital, and we want the same to happen with our universities and colleges.
Gentlemen, Thabo, since you're here, these are professors and lecturers here. I just want to hear from them. Are we at that stage where we can afford free education, quality education in terms of higher education? Let's start with you, Tshamano.
Okay, maybe before I get there, I think I just need to start by pointing out, from what I'm reading from him, it sounds to me that they're very clear. There's not going to be any discussions around
fees. It's all about transformation.
Around fees. It's all about transformation. Should you bring in the issue about fee increase, we're most likely going to go back to what we've seen last year. Perhaps maybe that should be the question, but I don't want to ask that question myself. Yes, you're asking a question about is it possible, you know, the affordability. Let's be honest, I don't think as a country we are at a point where we can afford to have free education, and I know this you know, has been debated, and it's still going to continue to be debated, but I think somehow people just have to reach you know, some consensus. Yes, students, especially those who come from you know, the black community, who struggle so much. They need assistance. He spoke about issues about accommodation, transport, and all of that. So there are many issues that obviously needs to be considered. But to say we can have free education tomorrow, where you know, if it's okay, well, of course, I don't want to talk about University X, but if you pay 60,000, for example, can we really afford that? I really don't think so, but we need to find common ground.
Prof?
Yes, I think the point I like about what students are doing and what the student leadership is saying is that it's important that politicians deliver on the promises they make to our people. A lot of promises and undertakings were made from 1994. And in most instances, these guys, they just negotiate their way through and never deliver. The issue of free education, especially for students at higher level institutions, who must come up with skills to expand and develop the economy that we have. There's a lot of justification for it.
Please take us through.
Excuse me?
Take us through.
There's a lot of the reason why I say there's a lot of justification for it is because we need a lot of skilled people to go out there and be innovative, assist in the development of South Africa's economy, so that we can broaden the domestic market. Because once you grow your domestic market, you actually grow the strength of your domestic economy. So that you don't have an economy which depends too much on external injection. You see? That is the problem we have with South African economy. The domestic market is very constrained. We need more growth. We need to expand the domestic market. On the issue of sustainability, whether the country can afford, I think that was your question.
Yes.
Can the country afford a free higher education?
Quality higher education.
Quality higher education. I mean, that one is quite difficult. And the reason why I'm saying it's quite difficult to answer is because you must first look at the global political economy, the stress, the constraints that are affecting South Africa's political economy itself. But at the same time, one could argue that South Africa does have money to pay for free higher education. If you can look at corruption, which has to be stopped, unnecessarily high levels of salaries you find in parastatals, look at the president's budget, the budget for the presidency itself. There's just a lot which you keep questioning. Why so much money? Why so many spouses? Why is the taxpayer paying for this? So in other words, there are areas where we can cut as the people of South Africa to
Is that your stance, Tom?
I think the question that we ought to be asking is, can South Africa afford not to educate its young people? And then the political will to that commitment. Look, Higher Education Summit, which the minister convened last year, just before the wave of fees must fall, responded to something that is quite important. It classified higher education as a public good. And once it's a public good, it means the state has a responsibility towards its delivery. And we can't be arguing on why are we not implementing the ideas and goals of the Freedom Charter. ANC resolutions over time. And like the prof saying that, I think since 1994, free education, even now in these elections, it continues to be the story that we are told by the ruling party, that free education is their policy. We simply saying to the African National Congress, implement your own resolution, implement your own policies. For us to accept the commission was a compromise, I must say, because when the World Cup was hosted in this country, there was no commission. When they bid for Olympics and all these other things, there are no commissions. So we want implementation of the very same policies we have defined, of the very same resolutions we have came up with, of the very same struggles we have been waging before even SASCO was formed. So we believe this is not the correct time. The students have stood up and said, implement what you are saying is good for this country. The question of affordability, we must ask ourselves is if the country can afford not to have an educated and skilled youth in this country.
Wow, that's where we're going to leave it, unfortunately. That is Mr. Thabo Moloja, the SASCO president. Let me now thank the rest of my guests in studio. Tshamano Makhadi, thank you so much. Professor Kwande Okondlo, who have been joining us, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick ad break. We're back with more Media Monitor shortly after this. Do stay with us.
Gateway Clinic has been funding it. The foundation has been funding it to help people, especially the LGDP, because they don't easily get services. And since they've started this clinic, many of them, you can see they are coming. And the rest of the country, we're going to learn a lot of good lessons from this Gateway Clinic on how to take care of key populations. Because LGDP are key populations which around the world have been neglected, and he has been taking care of them.
In Africa, technology has created many new ways of doing things.
ICT is an increasingly important part of everybody's life.
It's being used in education, for social media, and now for farming too.
The best thing about internet for a farmer is that you get to share information.
On Network, we give you all the important African technology and social media news. That's Network with me, Siphomelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time, only on SABC News.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, the bittersweet news is that the Reserve Bank has kept the interest rate unchanged but downgraded its economic growth forecast from 0.6% to just 0%. Now, this adjustment comes off the back of the International Monetary Fund's revision of the country's economic growth of 0.7% in January to just 0.1%. And for this discussion, I'm very pleased to be joined by Mr. Sichaba Gankosi. And of course, he is the Business Day editor. Sichaba, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Alicia.
Sichaba, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this graph. I mean, some worrying information indeed when it comes to the growth prospects. And of course, the South African Reserve Bank there, its projections down from the IMF's, which kept the economic outlook for 2016 at 7. Let's look first at the repo rate that was not changed at 7%. What does this say?
Well, I mean, it's good news for the consumer because it means they'll be able to service their debt. It won't put any pressure on their pockets, so they'll be able to sustain the kind of livelihood that they've adjusted to under the harsh economic conditions that we have. But it also means that the Reserve Bank does not have much room to maneuver now. If you look at our economy, it's basically stagnated. So we're not growing at all. So you cannot then punish a consumer, or there's no way they can get any money. So that's why they kept the reserve, the repo rate unchanged, which I think is good for the consumer.
Speaking of growth, Sichaba, I mean, let's move on and see what graph entails. I mean, it says that the projected growth has now went further down to 0%. And the International Monetary Fund had just said that we could be growing by 0.6%. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, we're faced with some harsh realities. As when you started, you said, one of the things is that we're dealing with a natural temperament called drought, and that's putting so much pressure on our economy because we're forced now to import so many things that we would otherwise have in the country. We're also dealing with the sluggish economy, which is not going anywhere. And what it means is that for the next foreseeable future, what we think could contain employment is not going to happen. In fact, we are likely to see negative growth in the economy. I know it may sound alarmist, but at the moment we are at zero. Anything can go.
But Sithaba, what are some of the biggest, I know you touched on some of them, the biggest contributing factors to that sluggish growth?
Look, I mean, we basically an economy that exports to international markets.
So the drought has a huge effect.
Once the meltdown of commodities in China and elsewhere in the world hit, it meant that our manufacturing capacity shrinked. We also had to deal with our shortages of electricity. At least Eskom seems to have turned the corner around. But at the time, our economy was at the point. Over and above, now we're dealing with the drought, which nobody predicted. It's said to be one of the worst in decades. And it's true because what you have now is that we have to import maize, for example. And once you import that, maize is a very important ingredient in our economy because for your stock feed, for example, you use maize. And once you import it, so the currency is low, so you import it at a higher cost, and then it comes in, and what the producers do, they pass on the cost to the consumer. So you find that your food basket is no longer as it was, let's say, a month before.
But Sithaba, look, let's look at the IMF's projections once again. I mean, we are almost in the second quarter of this year, and we are due for a review of that possible downgrade. What does this latest forecast then mean in terms of us going forward? Can we, are we going to be able to try and make up for the loss?
Difficult to say, because one of the things that we probably might have to look at is our public service debt. We pay so much, and also when the rating agencies look at us, they look at our fundamentals. We do have strong fundamentals. I mean, if you look at the Reserve Bank, it's very independent, it's very strong, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. But our revenue collection, it means with the shrinking economy, the government cannot get revenue to subsidize some of its projects. So all those factors are one of the things that the rating agencies are looking at. So they're probably saying where to from here for South Africa. We said to be likely to grow marginally in next year. Hopefully we grow in such a way that we're able to deal with our domestic issues. But you cannot isolate South Africa from the international economy.
It's a global worry.
It's a global meltdown. The entire world.
With the Brexit there, just a couple
Brexit, everything is just come to where we are. Yeah.
Look, Sithaba, I mean, we know that the finance department went on a campaign to try and see some of the measures that could be taken to try and, encourage growth in terms of the economy. Do you think those are not going to be effective enough before we go for that review just now for the downgrade?
Look, I mean, we've got a very vibrant treasury, which has lobbied not only government, it has lobbied business and labor to work together basically to avert the downgrade. And that is a good sign on our part. So when the rating agencies look at us, they look at all those things, whether we're working together or whether somebody is pulling the other side and somebody is pulling the opposite direction. But also don't forget that we're entering a season where we are likely to see industrial action I mean, if you look at the mining sector, for example,
Yeah.
there's news brewing that people are demanding
Higher
so much
wages,
yes. Now, once that comes, it's going to put another pressure on the economy. So I'm sure we're in for,
Look, let's look at this here now, Chaba. What do you read from this? I mean, the economy outlook 2016 SAB versus the IMF projection for 2017 now. 1% from a previous 1.3% forecast. It just seems that we're going down.
We seem to be going down. I mean, in the first quarter, when in about 2 months, the Reserve Bank was projecting something, and now it's said we're not growing. It's zero. It's cutting.
0.8, if I remember correctly.
0.6, yes. And the IMF was saying the same thing, and now it's saying we're not going anywhere. So all those things are putting so much pressure on the economy. The sentiment that we have is negative to start with. And once you have that, you look at your growth prospects and you realize that the economy basically is standing still. Now, what can be done, nobody knows.
I want to ask that, Chaba. Please give us some solutions. What can we, what needs to change? Do we need to change something in terms of the way we spend or the way I don't know, what needs to happen just for, a productive growth projection or to encourage that contribution to growth in the economy?
Look, I mean, if you have to reignite the economy, you've got to make the economy much more expansive and an economy that is able to service the citizenry in the country. But the economy is at zero. So it's basically not growing. And as I said, the likelihood is that we might have some marginal growth next year. But there are things that are in our hands to do. Like, for example, if we look at the public service wage bill, we can do something about it. If we look at the extent of the government or the money that we spend on government departments, those are things that we can do. And for consumers, it would be better for us to spend a little less than we used to. I mean, we have to forgo some of the luxuries that we have. I mean, so that we can be able to service our debt. The fact that the Reserve Bank has kept the repo rate unchanged does not mean that it might not change in the future.
Chaba, then, I mean, what about the NDP? Is there anything that can contribute to what you've just said as some of the factors that will aid in trying to better our economy?
Well, the NDP, obviously, everybody is talking about it, but it's yet to be implemented in full. Maybe that should be the key to our economic growth, because it talks of many things that everybody agrees with. But for an economy that is stagnant, it is difficult for the NDP to be implemented at this point. As I say, for government to survive, they rely on the revenue collection from people who work. So they collect taxes, but if the economy is depressed and the manufacturing is not producing, it means government is not getting money from companies, it's not getting monies from individuals. So our revenue is so small that it leaves government with very little room to maneuver.
To breathe. Well, this is what the SAB governor says. He says there are some encouraging signs of moderation in some food categories at both the consumer and producer price levels, and future prices of grains have declined markedly. What does this mean in layman's terms, Chab?
Look, I mean, if you look at the last index, we saw that our retail sector was a bit vibrant, which means that our consumers were able to spend some of the money that they have, and the fact that we have kept the repo rate unchanged means that our food basket is, or rather servicing our debt is not going to be expensive. But the inflation, the Reserve Bank has always targeted the brand of 3 to 6%.
Yes.
But now it's breached that. And I think it means for me and you to go and buy something, we'll have to spend much more than we used to spend in the past.
Chaba, these are also such shocking news. And of course, I don't know if I should be really depressed, but thank you so much, Chaba, for joining us. Mr. Tshamano Makhadi, an economist with us here in studio. Thank you so much to you at home for joining Media Monitor. We are back same time and place right here on SABC News next week. But don't go away. I'm back with AM News on top of the hour. This is SABC News. Thank you, Chaba.